Hey everyone, David Aragona here for another installment of the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series. We got a slew of prep races taking place this weekend around the country, and I think it's going to be hard to top the Southwest Stakes for being the most interesting race to handicap of that quartet because it drew a field of 12 runners, and there's really no standout in the field. It's a fun handicapping exercise, and it should be a mouth-watering race to actually bet because there are many ways to go and prices to make a case for. This race is the 11th race on the card at Oaklawn Park on Saturday, approximate post time of about 5:50 Eastern time. And you could see from looking at the morning line for this race, not exactly clear who's going to go favorite. The number one, Maycox Bay, is the lukewarm 3-1 morning line favorite. I'd probably be somewhat surprised if he's actually the favorite in this race. I would imagine that the number 7, Carbone, could be a slight favorite. I think he is the third choice on the line at 9-2, but hard to really be sure about that because there are many ways for bettors to potentially go. A couple from the Steve Asmussen barn in here, and also a runner shipping in from California for Bob Baffert, and those types of runners always take their fair share of wagering action. So definitely it's going to be a wide open board in this Southwest Stakes. To get a sense of how this race might be run to the first turn, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector because I think the pace is a really important discussion point in this Southwest Stakes. There appears to be a lot of speed signed on, especially from the outside. Horses like the number 10, Mystic Dan, and the number 11, Just Steel. Their jockeys have to be looking to get over to overcome those outside draws. Both runners with tactical speed who were contesting the pace in the Smarty Jones last time, a local prep for this. But if I had to pick a horse that I thought was most likely to be leading at the half mile, it would be the number 7, Carbone. He's been on the front end in both starts of his career so far, including a 6 furlong sprint. So you would imagine he has the early speed to get clear of these early. And without knowing if he can run a different way, the connections have to be looking to be aggressive with him. And we'll see how some others in behind adjust to what are likely to be those tactics. The number 1, Maycox Bay, a horse that wants to be forward. We'll see if he's fast enough to get the lead. The number 4, Auto the Conqueror, actually the stablemate of Carbone, another one that wants to be forward. So Steve Asmussen and the connections have some decisions to make about him. And the others in behind, some of them want to come from mid-pack, others off the pace, and we'll see if they can work out trips in this large 12-horse field. Well, let's break it down by going through this field in post-position order, beginning with the number 1, Maycox Bay. And he is coming off the fastest speed figure of anybody in this field when he earned that huge 116 TimeformUS speed figure last time out for that near 11-length romp in at Fairgrounds in an off-the-turf race. That was an allowance spot, and I think there are some things you want to be aware of for this performance. This was the first time that Maycox Bay was racing on Lasix, so he put forth that breakout effort racing on Lasix for the first time. Clearly, this being a Kentucky Derby prep race, he is not allowed to use Lasix, so he's coming off that anti-bleeding medication in this race. And also, just where did that performance come from? Because there's really no hints of that kind of ability in the first 4 starts of his career, particularly not in his race 2 back, the prior time that he had tried a 2-turn dirt route at Fairgrounds. He was stalking the pace that day and went backwards. What I will say is that he got very keen racing in a rating position 2 back and just didn't seem to respond well to those tactics being placed in behind runners. They went to the front end last time, and he seemed to relax much better, just racing all by himself freely on the front end and spurted away from that field in the late stages. The problem, though, is I don't foresee him getting that kind of trip here with so much other speed drawn to his outside. So I just question if he's going to receive those same kind of circumstances that allowed him to run that high speed figure last time. And I think if he is indeed a short price, you may want to regard him with some skepticism from that viewpoint. The number 2 is Charleston, and he is just going to be a big price in this race. He's one of a couple maidens in here, but this one just doesn't really seem to have the credentials to be competitive against this graded stakes quality field. Dropped in for a tag a couple of times, was not able to be successful racing against that weaker company, was no match off the claim for his current connections for a common defense. So we'll also see him this race, finished over 20 lengths behind that rival last time. So he would be a gigantic surprise in this spot. The number 3 is Magic Grand, who's another big price in this race. He at least is a closing type who figures to take advantage of any pace that does develop. The problem is, taking a look at his TimeformUS past performance, as you can see, he's gotten fast paces to close into in each of his last two starts. Those red color coded pace figures, very fast TimeformUS pace figures for especially that maiden win two back. And he was the recipient of those favorable circumstances, getting up to win by over 4 lengths. And then last time out, still lost to a rival that he'll be meeting again here, Otto the Conqueror, despite getting that very favorable pace setup. So he's going to have to take a big step forward from a class and speed figure standpoint if he's going to turn the tables on that one and be successful against this field that he faces in the Southwest. The number 4 is Otto the Conqueror. And let's take a look at that race that we were just referring to, the Springboard Mile at Remington Park, which did feature a fast pace. And Otto the Conqueror is the one that you probably want to upgrade out of that race if you're upgrading anybody out of the Springboard Mile, because he was the one that was chasing that early leader, Glenn Gary, pushing him every step of the way and eventually forging on past that rival in this duel to the wire between these two. And you could see they are both slowing down. They're very tired after slugging out for a good half mile from the finish line all the way to the wire. Magic Grant is getting to them at the end, but really no match for the top two from a total effort standpoint. Otto the Conqueror just running those red color TimeformUS speed figures, ran the much faster race overall, and you could see it in his upgraded 103 TimeformUS speed figure from that 90 final time number. Now, Otto the Conqueror, he was coming out of a live allowance race two back where he beat next out stakes winners like Kentucky Jockey Club winner Anna Marie and Just Steele, who came back to win a stakes in his next start as well. But he did have it all go his way that day. Blue color coded TimeformUS pace figures, setting that slow pace and just spurting away at the end. So I think you want to kind of find the happy medium between those two performances, because he is a horse that did run his best race two back when he was setting a slow pace, and I don't think he's going to be able to get that same kind of trip in this spot. Also unclear if he's a horse that really will keep getting better with added ground, given the fact that his dam was a confirmed sprinter. The number 5 is Winstock. We'll take a look at his most recent victory in the Grade 2 Los Alamitos Futurity at Los Al out in California. And he was a really game winner of this race. He was fending off a horse who took a good run at him up the inside. And the stretch here actually looks like Stronghold gets on even terms with Winstock in mid-stretch here. And this Bob Baffert runner battles back to get the victory. He has clearly taken a big step forward since they stretched out in distance around 2 turns, was a 13-1 upset maiden winner by over 7 lengths two back with improved speed figure, and took another step forward to beat this field again at 13-1 last time. Rarely do you see Bob Baffert horses go off at those kinds of prices. The problem is it kind of feels like you missed the boat on Winstock, getting those $28 win mutuals on him, and now he's going to be a much shorter price in this race, stepping up against a way tougher field than he faced in the Los Alamitos Futurity last time, and it's unlikely that he is going to get to that same kind of trip, setting a moderate pace. He's another horse that wants to be forward in this race. Both of his big victories have come in gate to wire fashion. It doesn't feel like he might be quick enough to make the lead here. So I think there are definitely some questions about the trip for Winstock as well. The number 6 is Liberal Arts. And I think if you're looking for a closer in this race that just kind of makes sense from a class perspective, you're probably landing on a horse like Liberal Arts, because you have to respect his overall trajectory of his career. He's been improving his TimeformUS speed figure significantly with each subsequent start. So he's making that progression that you want to see from 3-year-olds at this point of the season. And he's got the right kind of running style for this race. He did get a fast pace to close into two back in that Iroquois, and that might look like a disappointing performance on paper for him to only finish third that day with that good pace setup. But that's a race that you might want to go back and watch on your own, because he had multiple points of trouble in that race. An early stretch, ran into traffic, had to alter course past the 8th pole, losing momentum once again. So there's an argument he might have won that race if his rider had been able to get him out into the clear at any point. And then last time out, he was just best in that street sense. He got the distance stretching out around the 2 turns for the first time. You can question the quality of the field that he beat, but this is a big, long striding son of Arrogate that clearly is getting better with time and more ground, and he's supposed to get the right kind of pace set up in here. So yes, he's got to take another step forward, but he just appears to fit this race really well, and he probably is not going to be that short a price going out for connections that are not household names. Moving on to the number 7, Carbone, and I think he could be the favorite in this race off of this last performance that was quite visually impressive, winning this optional claiming race, going the 2 turns for the first time at Oaklawn Park. And you just have to like what you're seeing from this horse. He's the son of Matoli, who seemed to have no problem stretching his speed out around this 2-turn 1-mile distance. You see that big high striding to the finish action from him. So it doesn't seem like he's just a pure sprinter. So that was definitely a good sign, because he did seem like such a precocious his type on debut, winning off by 8 lengths. That 112 TimeformUS final time number knocked down a little bit due to a slow pace, but that is a strong speed figure for a first time starter. And Carbone backed it up last time, beating what seemed like a pretty good field against Allowance Company, the fourth place finisher Northern Flame. He came back to win a slightly weaker allowance race last weekend, but at least validating the form and the speed figure from that victory by Carbone. So he seems legitimate. The big question is, can he work out the right trip in a race that features much more speed than he encountered in his last couple of starts? I think that's the big unknown for this promising runner going out for the Steve Asmussen barn. The number 8 is Common Defense, and he is another one coming off a recent victory at Oaklawn, though it was just a maiden victory. I liked what this horse did in this race. The pace was definitely in his favor because they went quickly up front. It did kind of fall apart in general, but it's not like Common Defense was that far off the pace early. He was stalking behind the leaders, racing forwardly in mid pack, and actually let another rival go right on by him around the far turn before angling out and finishing powerfully through the wire. That was the short stretch for the 1 mile distance at Oaklawn. But if you watch the rest of that replay on out through the rest of the stretch into the clubhouse turn, this horse really gallops out strongly and puts a lot of distance between himself and the rest of the field. So I think there's evidence that actually even more ground is going to be right up Common Defense's alley. He's got a ton of stamina breeding on the bottom side of his pedigree, and he's by underrated dirt route influence Caraconti. So I think that you can project further improvement for this horse. It's just a big step up in class. One thing he does have going in his favor, though, is this statistic that I found in DRF Formulator for trainer Ken McPeak. With a 38 horse sample, Ken McPeak is winning at nearly 20% with horses that are coming out of maiden victories trying dirt route stakes races for the first time. So it's a pretty interesting sample of 38 runners that are winning at 18% with a healthy ROI. Prices winning in the sample, horses stepping up from maiden wins into stakes races and dirt routes. And that's exactly what Common Defense is doing. So I think you can have some confidence that Common Defense is going to show up in this race. We'll just see if he's good enough. The number 9 is a Linebacker, and he's another runner that's coming out of a maiden race, though he was not the winner of this race. He actually is still a maiden coming into the Southwest Stakes, but despite the fact that he's lost all 3 starts up until this point, he's run well in every start of his career, particularly in this last race when, before we picked up this replay, he was in some heavy traffic coming around the far turn. And also, we didn't show the start of this race, but he was off a bit slowly towards the back of the pack, had ground to make up going into that clubhouse turn, actually had a little traffic into the clubhouse turn, was out of position, advanced very willingly around the far turn while racing in that heavy traffic, and arguably could have gotten closer to the eventual winner of that race if he had been able to commence his move a little bit sooner. But he was really running powerfully through the line. If you look up some internal fractions for that race, he was finishing best of all at the finish line, and he just strikes me as one that we haven't yet seen the best of. He went 1 turn in the first couple starts of his career. Obviously, some things were expected of him, attracting Flavien Prat to ride him in the first 2 starts of his career for a relatively low-profile barn. Closed well for 3rd on debut. Again, closed well in his 2nd start, staying on in a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end, but that legalized maiden race to that came up extremely fast, and he earned a 105 TimeformUS speed figure, this horse did, that makes him very competitive against this field. And watching his races, taking stock of his pedigree with a lot of stamina on the bottom side, and even looking at that last replay where he's just this big, long striding horse, he really strikes me as one that's going to want every bit of this mile and the 16th distance, especially a race that is supposed to have some pace in it. So he's one that's 30 to 1 on the morning line that I think you can easily make a case for in this spot. The number 10 is Mystic Dan, and he's a runner that's coming out of the Smarty Jones Stakes, the local prep for this, one of a couple coming out of that Smarty Jones. And while he did earn a strong 110 TimeformUS speed figure for that race, didn't love the way he finished off that race. He was contesting the pace. It wasn't on his pace, but he really wasn't finishing through the wire. And I think that's the biggest concern for this guy, trying the mile and the 16th distance once again, especially in a race that's supposed to feature a lot of speed drawn inside of him. So he either is going to get hung out into the clubhouse turn or have to be used to clear those horses to his inside. It's just hard to see him finishing more strongly given the way that this pace is supposed to shake out. So while he does have those flashy speed figures in his form, One of them is in a 5.5 furlong race, and one of them, it's just a little tough for me to see him repeating it given the pace scenario of this race. So he was not for me in this spot. The number 11, Just Steel, he's coming out of that same race, the Smarty Jones, and we'll take a look at that race that we were just referring to. He's coming into the stretch 4 wide. Mystic Dan is the horse right to his inside, and Just Steel finishes a little better than Mystic Dan does, and he was sitting just off that early pace, stalking the pace in third early, took over, and he's another one that just could not quite see out the mile and a 16th distance on this day. So a little tough for me to see him running better, just given the pace scenario of this race. I think Just Steel has ability. We saw it too back when he was the winner of that stakes race against a solid field at Churchill Downs, and even in the hopeful stakes when he was running in the teeth of a very fast pace and didn't throw in the towel until late. But I feel like he's a horse that ultimately is going to be best going a little shorter, maybe 2 turns a little outside of his scope. So maybe not the right race for Just Steel, even though he's a horse with some talent. And then on the far outside, the final horse we'll talk about is the number 12, Awesome Road. He is cross-entered in a stakes race at Turfway Park on Friday, but our DRF colleague, Mary Rampolini, did report that Brad Cox planning on running him in this Southwest instead, despite the fact that he drew this seemingly disadvantageous far outside post position. This horse was also entered in the Lecomte Stakes a couple weeks ago at Fairgrounds. Going with this spot instead, and it seems like a tough assignment for a horse, especially given this draw. Much was expected of him off that impressive maiden victory on debut at Ellis Park. Earned a fast speed figure for that race, but he was beaten at short prices in 2 stakes races stretching out in the next couple of starts. Obviously faced some tough ones in the Breeders' Futurity behind Locked and the Wine Steward, but really more was expected last time in that Kentucky Jockey Club. Would he ranged up around the far turn like he was really going to do something in the stretch of that race. And it's just like he hit the wall in the final 3/16 of a mile, really could not finish after commencing that rally. And you have to wonder if he's a horse that just might not be up to the challenge at this point in his career. And also, personally, I wonder if he's a horse that ultimately might want a surface switch down the line, because there is some turf pedigree on the bottom side. And the way that he starts to make that move and then flattens out, sometimes that's indicative of a horse that doesn't really want these dirt route distances. Well, let's throw my picks for this race, and I'll admit there are a lot of ways I could have gone in this Southwest Stakes. Just so many horses you could possibly make a case for. I ultimately, as I often do in these competitive handicapping races, wanted to let value be my guide, and I just tried to put horses in my top 3 pick positions that I thought would be bettable prices in this race. I think in some ways the horse that is the most logical of those is the number 6, Liberal Arts, who is 8-1 in the morning line. I could see him drifting down a little bit off of that, but he just seemed like a reliable horse to show up in this race. But the 2 most interesting prices for me are the number 8, Common Defense, who I've got in the 3rd position, but especially the number 9, a Linebacker, who is my top pick in the Southwest. Even though he's a maiden coming into this race, I have liked all 3 starts of his career, especially that first 2-turn attempt last time. And I think the connections are making a pretty savvy move to try this Southwest Stakes, especially given how much pace is signed on. I think he's going to get the right kind of trip, and he could fly under the radar going out for some lower profile connections. So it is the number 9, a Linebacker, for me as my top pick at a big price in this Grade 3 Southwest on Saturday at Oaklawn Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.